Master Yaddle is right about one thing. The Sith Lord is not to be trifled with.
But the wisdom of the Council is to be cautious until we know more.
But I will not be there to protect you, my old Padawan.
Obi-Wan fills that role now. He acquits himself quite well.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Charlie. This is my full Star Wars Tales of the Jedi episode video. They released all the shorts at the same time. There's 6 episodes. There's a bunch of new Easter eggs and reveals that we have to talk about. So be sure to subscribe to get all the videos. We're almost at the end of Andor Season 1 right now, and the next big Star Wars thing will be the Mandalorian Season 3 episodes in February next year, and right after that, the Ahsoka episodes. So no coincidence that like a big part of Tales of the Jedi was about them filling in missing parts of Ahsoka's backstory. I've already done big videos on the Mandalorian Season 3 trailer, the Ahsoka trailer, so I'll post links for both of those at the end of this and down in the description below. The other big part of the series was mostly dedicated to Count Dooku's untold backstory. Like it was all this missing history, all these missing details for both Dooku and Ahsoka, so it was really cool.
Master!
I always love having more Ahsoka stuff. She's one of the best Star Wars characters of all time. Rosario Dawson has been awesome as the live-action version so far, and what little we've seen of her in live-action. Cannot wait for the full Ahsoka episodes when it starts next year. But I actually enjoyed the Dooku parts of Tales of the Jedi even more, learning more about his backstory, because he's this really important character in the story, just in general, in all of Star Wars, but we've only gotten pieces of his backstory so far. Like, he was heavily featured during the Clone Wars episodes, but that was much later in his timeline after he'd gone full Darth Tyrannus evil, and he was much more like he was during Attack of the Clones. We'd never really seen his life before he turned to the dark side, became the Emperor's next Sith apprentice. Like, what was his life like before he became evil? So we'll start with all the Dooku parts of the Tales of the Jedi series first, then I'll talk about the Ahsoka parts. What we learn about Count Dooku's story is that he originally is from the planet Serenia. He was from a noble house, thus the title Count Dooku. But as a child, he was abandoned by his family and taken in by the Jedi Order when they learned that he was Force sensitive. He was born during the High Republic era. They're actually trying to make that a big thing in live action now. Like the next big Star Wars series they're working on is a High Republic Sith series, but it's more of like a Sith series set during the High Republic era. So like we might see a young version of Palpatine, a much younger version of Yoda, maybe a very, very young version of Dooku, just depending on where it picks up exactly in the timeline. But Dooku, as you've seen in live action in the Clone Wars and now in Tales of the Jedi, was a very formal person. He was raised inside the nobility, so those mannerisms, the personality, just the way that a noble person carries themselves in the Star Wars universe kind of stayed through him through his entire life. As opposed to classic farm boy Luke Skywalker, like very blue-collar attitude, way of speaking, until he fully became a Jedi Knight and started on the path to creating his Jedi Temple and training people like Grogu. Briefly training Grogu. Once Luke Skywalker became a Jedi Knight, he became a much more formal person. We learned Dooku's Padawan was Qui-Gon Jinn himself, even though they used a different voice actor in Episode 2 for the young version of his character. Liam Neeson did come back to do the voice for the older Qui-Gon Jinn in Episode 4 after he'd become a Jedi Master and had started training Obi-Wan Kenobi. Dooku's timeline during all of his episodes start when Qui-Gon was very young, like long before the events of Phantom Menace in the Clone Wars, and then end right before Attack of the Clones. And his episodes are meant to show how Count Dooku slowly became disillusioned with the Jedi Order, the Republic itself on a political level. Like at least him turning away from those things initially was more of a political thing. It didn't become personal till much, much later, which I'll talk about. But it's meant to explain why he created the separatist movement, like why politically he was opposed to what the Republic was doing, how he'd seen that they'd grown corrupt. Even though obviously what Palpatine did was very terrible, they wanted to show you that even despite all that, the Republic was still a little bit rotten. They show you why he turned away from the Jedi Order and approached Palpatine to become his next Sith apprentice, because he'd seen that the Jedi Order looked like they were also just becoming tools of this corrupt Republic. And that's actually a big thing that George Lucas has talked about. Like, they wanted to show the fallacy of the Jedi Order, how they'd gotten too ingrained in their ways, too stubborn. That's actually one of the major reasons why Count Dooku turned away from them and blames them for Qui-Gon Jinn's death. Because during Phantom Menace, they refused to believe that there could be another Sith Lord and another Sith apprentice. Like, no, that's not a problem. Don't think about that. Don't worry about it. Cut to a little bit later, Qui-Gon Jinn dies at the hands of Darth Maul.
Promise me you will train the boy. He is the chosen one. He will bring balance.
So you could actually call Count Dooku's storyline during Tales of the Jedi the tragedy of Count Dooku the Wise.
Did you ever hear the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise?
Everyone posts all the Palpatine memes again. It's basically the story of the fall of Count Dooku. He was this very good Jedi Master, very powerful, very wise, but he saw the flaws in the Jedi Order, the injustice in the galaxy, and wanted to fix that on a political level, which is why he created the Separatist movement. But they do explain that he didn't want a giant war, he didn't want to kill a bunch of people, he didn't have evil intentions, he didn't want to kill the Jedi either, he just opposed their viewpoint. That's why I say it was more of a political thing for him and less of a personal thing. It didn't become personal until the death of Qui-Gon Jinn. But you have to remember that Palpatine is manipulating him this whole time, the way that he manipulates all of his apprentices and everyone around him. Like he manipulated Darth Maul to his own ends, he manipulated Anakin Skywalker. So even though Count Dooku had the best of intentions, the story is basically the fall of Count Dooku and Palpatine manipulating him, pushing him towards the dark side, forcing him to do all these evil things. Like he forces Count Dooku to kill Master Yaddle, basically. Which is also the other big reveal of this series. They finally explain what happened to Master Yaddle. Now, there's a real-life explainer, like what really happened and why she didn't come back in the prequels, and then there's the way they explain it inside the canon. Because she's on the Jedi Council during Phantom Menace, that was the first time she ever showed up in the canon. George Lucas introduced the character then, and then we never saw her again after that. The real reason why Yaddle didn't come back in Attack of the Clones is because George Lucas just kind of changed his mind about using the character. Like, you know what? I want Yoda to feel more unique, more special. I only want one of him on screen. We don't need a second version of Yoda. So it was more about him just backtracking on his use of other beings of Yoda's race. And then they just never address that in the rest of the movies. Like, they just never talk about Yaddle ever again. So like a lot of Star Wars things, like the movies do something big and then the tie-in material attempts to explain all the gaps in the logic. There were some comics at the time that tried to explain what happened to Yaddle, but now this new Tales of the Jedi story is the new, full canon backstory for what happened to her. They revealed that Qui-Gon Jinn's death broke Count Dooku. He was his Padawan, so of course he felt very close to him, even though he'd long since stopped being his Padawan.
Obi-Wan fills that role now.
I should like to meet him someday. You're always singing his praises.
It's a great pity that our paths have never crossed before, Obi-Wan. Qui-Gon always spoke very highly of you.
And that was the major turning point for him, where he really committed to the Separatist movement in the Sith. More so the Sith, because obviously he killed Master Yaddle. He blamed the Jedi Council for Qui-Gon's death because they refused to listen to him about the threat of Darth Maul. And a lot of the first part of the episode takes place during Phantom Menace, if that wasn't clear. Like, it's right after Qui-Gon Jinn has come back to Coruscant with Anakin Skywalker and informed the Jedi Council about what happened on Tatooine with Darth Maul. So it's like right after that meeting, and it's why Yaddle is saying, well, you know, the council, we're trying to be cautious. We don't want to alert everybody, alarm everyone before we know what's really going on. But then they explained that Yaddle is actually one of the few people who actually realized the turmoil that was going on inside Count Dooku and genuinely tried to help him. After the fact, she left her post on the Jedi Council because she also, too, felt like the Jedi Council was wrong. And she tries to have a similar conversation with him that, say, like Yoda and Obi-Wan Kenobi has with Anakin Skywalker. This whole idea about the role of fear and how Palpatine is using their fears against them, pushing them to the dark side. So, like, this is a big parallel for what happened to Anakin Skywalker as well. So if it wasn't clear, Yaddle is meant to be dead, he's meant to have killed her, and that's meant to take place right before the events of Attack of the Clones. Like, this place is also shown in the prequel movies where they meet. I think after he actually killed her is when Emperor Palpatine named him Darth Tyrannus, like when he gave him his Sith name. During his storyline, they also kind of throw Mace Windu under the bus just a little bit too. They make it seem like he was more of a political player, playing the Game of Thrones, so to speak, just trying to get a position on the council. Like, you knew about this the whole time, you were just positioning yourself for his seat on the council. So they really want you to sympathize with Count Dooku and just show how he was taken advantage of, his fall from grace, and how Palpatine took advantage of that, basically. That's why I say the tragedy of Count Dooku the Wise. And if you guys didn't realize that Yaddle was actually voiced by Bryce Dallas Howard, obviously she was doing a very different type of voice. And the other big surprise, too, with Yaddle's appearance is that she talks totally normal.
I guess word travels fast.
Well, or statements to the council were rather surprising.
It turns out the rest of their race doesn't speak like Yoda in that backwards way, which I actually think is a good move on Star Wars' part, just treating the canon that way. It's another way to make Yoda feel like a very unique type of character, even though his race is so rare in the galaxy. Like now we have Grogu. It also lets you know that Grogu is probably going to speak more like Yaddle in a more normal type of way once he eventually does start speaking. I wouldn't even be surprised if he can speak right now. Like, he's over 50 years old, so he's probably capable of speaking some types of words, he just chooses not to. And speaking of Grogu, I know a lot of you are asking, is Yaddle really Grogu's mother? Is Yoda his father? Now, I think that they're probably not, even though their race is super rare. There are rules about whether or not Jedi can have children, obviously a big thing with Anakin Skywalker and Padme, but the Jedi Order had special contingency rules for Yoda's race and other races of low numbers. Ki-Adi is a really good example of this, where they allowed Jedi to have children if their race was at danger of becoming extinct. So technically by the rules of the Jedi Order, just canonically, it would have been okay for Yoda and Yaddle to have a child, either separately or together. The reason why I don't think that Yoda and Yaddle are Grogu's parents is because they want Grogu as a character just to function within the canon as a completely new entity. His parents are just meant to be random members of Yoda's race from somewhere out in the deep galaxy. And honestly, I don't think that they want to reveal that for a long, long time. Like, if we could go 50 years without them fully revealing who Grogu's parents actually are, I think that they would do it that way. George Lucas was notoriously protective of the Yoda character, which is one of the reasons why he got rid of Yaddle in the canon. He also prevented a lot of people that were doing the books and the comics and the tie-in material from over-explaining Yoda. Like, he didn't want them writing a bunch of new backstory for Yoda, just because he felt like it was more powerful that the character was still such a mystery. Which I think Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni are sort of carrying forward with the Grogu character, like they want him to be as mysterious as possible. Then talking about the Ahsoka story during Tales of the Jedi, so we learn all about her backstory, her birth, her family, and then a little bit that ties in with the events of Revenge of the Sith and the Clone Wars Season 7 at the end. So it kind of covers her entire timeline, but just filling in a couple major gaps, like where did she come from, how did she wind up in the Jedi Order, and what happened right after Revenge of the Sith, after she crashed on that planet at the end of Clone Wars Season 7. She's from the Togruta race, her home planet is Shilly, her mother is named Pav T, and she's actually voiced by Janina Gavankar, who also played Iden Versio during the Battlefront games. We learn more about her biology, her race, like we see a bunch of other people of her race that obviously look very different. We learned that the white markings on her face aren't tattoos, they aren't makeup either, they're just like naturally part of her skin that evolve and grow over time with the rest of her body. It's the same thing too for her head tails. Those are called their leku, like they all have them, but they're all unique to each different member of their race. They explain how her mother, her people learned that she was force sensitive. She was about a year old during the events of the episode when the lion brings her back and she winds up saving herself basically using the force. But she didn't actually get taken to the Jedi Temple till she was about 3 years old, so like a little bit of time goes by, and it was Plo Koon who brought her to the Jedi Temple. Plo Koon's mask is actually inside Luthen's shop in the Star Wars Andor series after the events of Revenge of the Sith. The events of Episode 5 start earlier in the Clone Wars when she was much younger, she's still relatively new to being Anakin's Padawan. And he wants to train her to be a better Jedi by doing a lot of unconventional types of training with the other clones. The whole title of the episode is Practice Makes Perfect, so they have this big montage that covers a bunch of years through the Clone Wars where she just keeps getting knocked out, keeps getting a little bit better, a little bit better. That's why at the beginning of the montage she only has the one lightsaber, but she's using the twin lightsabers later because later she got twin lightsabers during her adventures in the Clone Wars. And this was all with the purpose of training her to be a better Jedi just in general, better warrior, better at protecting herself, protecting other people, which they later pay off during this scene at the end, taking place right in the middle of Order 66, right at the end of the Clone Wars Season 7, because the whole idea with the Clone Wars Season 7 is that that final arc was meant to show you the events of Revenge of the Sith from Ahsoka's perspective and the clones' perspective, so like you're witnessing Order 66 while you're amongst all the clones in Ahsoka while it's happening.
Execute Order 66.
Yes, Lord Sidious.
And she uses all this training that she got over these years, the practice makes perfect, to survive all these clones that want her dead because of Order 66. There's a little bit of a time jump for the very last episode, Episode 6. It's meant to cover the time right after Revenge of the Sith, after she's left the planet, she goes back to Naboo for Padme's funeral, and it explains how she gets involved with Bail Organa in the rebellion. So during the rebellion, Ahsoka used this codename called Fulcrum, and she served as sort of a lone gun going around helping people where they needed it in the Outer Rim, mostly to stay off the Emperor and Darth Vader's radar, but she also served as the point of communications between rebel cells. So early in the rebellion, before they actually came together before the events of Rogue One and A New Hope, they were all these different disparate cells across the galaxy, and the way they communicated with each other was to use a go-between, and Ahsoka was that go-between. So for instance, during Andor, when we're seeing the rebellion come together, when Luthen is listening on the rebel radio communications, technically he'd be listening to Ahsoka communicating rebel activity from other cells. So like Ahsoka is kind of involved in the events of Andor without literally being on the show. They show right after Padmé's death how she kind of gave up and tried to go to ground in the Outer Rim, and a lot of these events are actually covered in the Ahsoka book that they released a couple years ago. Like, the plot is loosely based on the plot of that Ahsoka book. She goes to ground and tries to live this simple existence, kind of doing what Grogu did, not using their Jedi abilities as much as possible. Also kind of what Obi-Wan Kenobi did, where we see him at the beginning of the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. But eventually someone learns that she's Jedi and forms the Sith Inquisitors, and this particular Inquisitor is called the Sixth Brother. His real name is Bill Valen. The reason why you don't see him during the Obi-Wan Kenobi series is because Ahsoka kills him before that series takes place. Even though there's a small time jump between Episode 5 and Episode 6, this is meant to take place really close after the events of Revenge of the Sith, like not a lot of time has gone by. Overall, the series was great, loved the stuff that they did, the animation was on point, Dave Filoni always does great things, I think he wrote all the episodes himself. My only minor complaint, like real minor complaint, is that they burned the title Tales of the Jedi on this anthology series and didn't actually do a Tales of the Jedi, Knights of the Old Republic types of series. Like, I would have rather them use the title Tales of the Jedi to do an actual Old Republic series. We'll see if they ever do that. It seems like they really want to do more with the High Republic era than they want to do with the Knights of the Old Republic era. But if you spotted any other Easter eggs or references in the episode or anything I didn't cover in this video, just write it below in the comments and I'll try to address it. Everyone click here for my full Mandalorian Season 3 trailer video, and click here for my new House of the Dragon Season 2 video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone stay safe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.